I'm the storyteller, and my stories must be told. I have many stories, tales for both the young and old. I have many voices to describe many places. Many names have I, and many faces. In Russia I am Ivan, in Sweden I am Jan. In Germany I'm Johann, in America I'm John. From my many travels I have gathered these tales to teach you good sense when all else fails. Sometimes there are tears, sometimes there is laughter, but always are happily ever after.
Long ago and far away in a remote and mountainous kingdom, there once stood a church by the side of a great lake. The time had come to repair the roof of the church, and one of the workers was a young man called Anton. He was good-natured, hard-working and willing, but he was also a bit of a dreamer and very clumsy. No matter how hard he tried to help, he always seemed to end up in trouble. In fact, it was easier for the other workers to send him home, rather than have him work with them. He lived with his mother, who earned a few pennies looking after the church. The poor woman was in despair over Anton. She was not getting any younger, and while the boy was kind-hearted and cheerful, it did seem that the more he grew, the more clumsy and the more of a dreamer he became. Even if she asked him to help with the simplest of tasks, he would go off into a dream and make a mess of it. "Oh, I despair of you, my son," she said. "What will you do when I die and there's no one to look after you?" The thought made Anton rather sad. So, to cheer himself up, he decided that he would walk over to a nearby farm to see if the farmer had any odd jobs he could do. His poor mother sighed to herself, "Oh, what will become of him?" Anton left the house, picked up his axe and set off up the valley. There was a bite to the air that meant winter was on its way. So imagine his surprise when he suddenly came across 3 strangely dressed young men lying fast asleep out in the open. It did look as though it might start to snow at any moment. It seemed to Anton that it would be much better if they had some kind of shelter over them. Well, he had plenty of time, and his mother was always telling him to be helpful to strangers. He set to work at once, and was so intent on his job that he quite failed to notice something rather remarkable. The 3 strangers were not so fast asleep as they seemed. Anyway, Anton kept on with his task. He cut stakes and thinned them and set them firmly in the ground so they could bear the weight of the cover. He gathered branches and laid them in position one by one, and all the while the strangers dozed on. Now you might think it odd that Anton never once asked himself what 3 young men were doing sleeping in the middle of a field. But he was so good-natured and such a dreamer himself that it all seemed perfectly natural. It was also surprising that someone as clumsy as he could make such a good job of building the shelter. The truth was, he was perfectly capable of doing anything he was interested in, so long as he didn't go off into a daydream. The shelter was soon finished. And a very handsome construction it was, too. Careful not to disturb the sleeping trio, Anton quietly went on his way. But the strangers, who had only been pretending to sleep, jumped to their feet and bounded over to Anton. "Why did you take such trouble over us?" they asked. "Well, it looks as though it might snow," said Anton. "I thought you needed a shelter." The strangers turned to one another and whispered together for a moment. Then turning back to Anton, the leader said, "May all your wishes come true." And with that, they left Anton and vanished. Well, that was curious. Quite surprising, the strange people one meets these days, thought Anton as he walked on towards the farm. The farmer was working in the barn and was more than happy to give Anton some simple jobs. He threw down some maize stalks that he would use for bedding for his animals during the winter, and made Anton stack it by the roadside. They worked away for a while, the farmer throwing down the maize and Anton carrying it out into the road. Quite soon, they had made a large stack. "Now what?" said Anton when they had finished. "Just carry it down to the cowshed," the farmer said. "I wish it would carry me," laughed Anton. Much to his astonishment and the farmer's consternation, the great bundle immediately started trundling down the road at a tremendous rate. What a wonderful sensation! It never occurred to him that he had the three strangers to thank for his wish coming true in such a way. Now the royal princess and her retinue were out taking a stroll in the crisp autumn weather. The princess was terribly bored with life. She was constantly attended by courtiers who agreed with everything she said, but none of them was at all amusing. Just then, Anton came speeding past. The princess took one look and started to roar with laughter. She had never seen anything so funny in all her life. But Anton was not at all pleased to be laughed at. Glaring at the laughing princess, he cried, "I wish I could be your husband, then I'd teach you to laugh at people." And from that moment on, the princess was a changed person. She moped and cried. She was afflicted by an appalling sadness that never left her. Her father, the king, summoned every single doctor in the land, every wise man, every astrologer, but nothing they prescribed could cure the princess. They gave her medicine and potions. They cast spells over her, nothing had any effect. These wise doctors had to report complete failure to the king. "What the princess needs is a husband, Your Majesty," they told him. "A husband will soon take her mind off things." "You're right," the king agreed. "But who? Who can I choose for my daughter?" He decided that all he could do was to leave the choice up to her. He would invite every single eligible prince in every single kingdom 100 miles around to a great feast where the princess could decide for herself. His advisors nodded sagely. It was what they were just about to suggest themselves. So the invitations were dispatched. At the grand feast, the princess anxiously examined each one, hoping that she would find again the young man to whom she had lost her heart, who was, of course, none other than Anton. She looked and peered. Was it perhaps him? No, it wasn't. Encouraged by her father, who was longing for his sad daughter to become bright and merry again, the princess slowly examined each prince, but none was the person she was looking for. The king flew into a fearful rage at his daughter's stubbornness. But she refused to change her mind. The only person she would marry was the young man who had made her laugh. But, spluttered the king, he might be a scoundrel, a beggar, a thief. You have to marry a prince. Never, cried the princess, who had a temper to match her father's. I shall have the young man who made me laugh and none other. What could he do with such a daughter? The king groaned. And she was his only daughter. It was she who would inherit the throne, and now she was insisting on marrying a nobody. Goodness knows who the fellow was and where he came from. But in the end, the king realized that he had no choice but to give in to his daughter's wishes. He would invite every young man in the kingdom to the palace and let her then make her choice. Anton's mother, like every other mother in the kingdom, managed to send Anton off to the palace looking almost presentable. She was sure that there was not a more handsome young man to be seen. Clumsy he may be, but at least he was good-looking. And as the choice was up to the princess, well, who knows? It wasn't really his fault that while he set off looking perfectly neat and respectable, as he neared the palace and met all the other young men, his outfit took a bit of a battering. Every single one arrived at the palace looking rather worse for wear. But that didn't seem to put off the princess. Anxiously, she scrutinized each new arrival, hoping against hope that her true love would be there. The king had his gravest doubts about the whole exercise. But the moment Anton arrived, the princess instantly recognized him. "Here's the one I shall marry and none other," she cried, running to him. The king took one look at Anton's shabby and disheveled appearance and nearly fainted. "That lout to be my son-in-law? That dullard?" Oh, he was almost speechless with rage. But the princess wasn't in the least cowed and insisted that if she didn't marry Anton, she would die a spinster. Anton, meanwhile, was quite happy to go along with whatever he was told to do. Because the king couldn't bear the thought of his daughter marrying a commoner, while the wedding preparations were underway, he secretly ordered a great chest to be made. the moment the wedding was over, the couple was to be locked in the chest and thrown out to sea. As befitted a princess and her groom, they were married with great pomp in the palace. Anton was very pleased with his lovely bride, and the princess was overjoyed to be married to the man who made her laugh. But immediately after the ceremony, before they could get properly used to being man and wife, they were thrown into the casket with just a bag of figs for food. The chest was firmly nailed up and thrown out into the great lake. Off they floated, to sink or swim, to drown or survive. The king washed his hands of his stubborn daughter and her lowly husband. The poor princess was beside herself with fear, even though they were together and had the figs to eat. "Oh, what will become of us?" she cried in despair. "We shall surely drown or starve to death. Is there no way of escape? Oh, my cruel father, to play such a trick on us. Is there nothing we can do, Anton, to free ourselves?" Anton thought for a bit and then said, "Well, I could wish we were no longer in this chest. I could wish that we had a palace of our own." And then he told the astonished princess the story of the 3 strange young men and how they had promised him that his every wish would be granted. And so far, all his wishes had come true. He had wished for the bundle of maize to carry him, and it had. He had wished to be the princess's husband, and now he was. If he tried very hard now, he told the princess, he may well be able to wish them their own palace. So he wished and wished. The lid of the chest flew open, and there, right before their eyes, was the most enchanting palace either of them had ever seen. The princess could not have created a more perfect place if she had wished it all herself. With a home like this, what more could they want? The princess began to realize that being married to someone whose wishes came true was much better than being married to the most powerful prince. However, Anton was such a kind and gentle person that she knew he would never use his power to harm anyone or anything, but would only ever wish for good things to happen. He wished them into the palace, and hey presto, there they were. What a wonderful time they had exploring the magical building. Each staircase led them to new sights. They felt they would never get tired of living in this marvelous place. The princess was so pleased that she had laughed at Anton on his funny bundle of maize, even although neither of them had ever dreamt that things would turn out quite like this. Their adventures had made them feel very hungry, but there was no food to be had in any of the rooms. "Could you, dear Anton, wish us something to eat?" the princess asked. Anton was sure he could. He wished with all his might. And there, in front of their eyes, appeared the most sumptuous spread. The princess had not been sure how many of Anton's wishes would come true, supposing the magic suddenly dried up. But it seemed that what he had told her was correct. He only had to wish, and the wish was granted. Now, don't you think you should look like a prince, since you now live in a prince's palace, Anton? She said to him. And that seemed a very good idea to him. The thought had not occurred to him before. So he wished again. And there he was, splendidly arrayed in the most princely outfit. And somehow he felt altogether more princely as a result. While Anton and his princess lived happily together in great harmony and happiness, the king was miserable without his daughter. He spent as much of his time as he could away from the palace, wishing he had not been quite so hasty. One day when he was out hunting, the chase drew him further away than he'd ever been before. He suddenly found himself on the edge of a great lake, with a most wonderful palace built on an island before him. When he entered the palace, he was greeted by two charming little children who seemed to know him well and who welcomed him with great merriment. Most strangely, although they were so small, they reminded him very strongly of someone he knew. He was most intrigued and happily let the children lead him up the stairs. And when he reached the top, there she was, his long-lost daughter, and the lout she had married. But the lout had turned into a handsome prince, exactly the type of young man he had always wanted her to marry. And the children, of course, were his grandchildren. What more could a king want? He needed nothing to complete his happiness, and lived there in the palace for the rest of his life, although his daughter complained that he spoilt his grandchildren terribly.